Miss Adler, your performance here today will determine your future. And frankly, your attitude has been disappointing. Play this. But sir, that's Liszt's La Campanella. It's an impossible ask, even for the most seasoned pianists. I can't. This is the moment Ilara Adler, a brilliant, self-taught pianist from the forgotten outskirts of a privileged university town, finds herself standing at a precipice, faced with a panel of skeptical, entitled professors who see only her worn clothes and quiet demeanor, not the symphony within her soul. Ilara is forced to confront a monumental challenge that threatens to steal her dreams. Unbeknownst to them, their cruel test is about to unleash a storm of talent that will not only redefine her own destiny, but expose the deep-seated prejudices within their esteemed institution, proving that true genius can never be silenced, no matter how many walls stand in its way. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much. And now, let's get back to the story. Miss Adler, your performance here today will determine your future. And frankly, your attitude has been disappointing. Play this. The words, sharp as shards of ice, sliced through the quiet tension of the audition room, hitting Ilara Adler with the force of a physical blow. Her heart, already a frantic drum against her ribs, stumbled. But sir, that's Liszt's La Campanella. It's an impossible ask, even for the most seasoned pianists. I can't. The last two words, a whisper barely audible, tasted like ash in her mouth. She felt the familiar burn of tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, a betrayal she refused to allow. Professor Alistair Thornton, a man whose silver hair and perfectly tailored suit seemed woven from the very fabric of the university's prestige, leaned forward, his gaze unwavering, chillingly devoid of empathy. Can't, Miss Adler, or won't. We've heard enough of your excuses. This is the condition of your scholarship. Prove your worth, or walk away. The weight of his words settled on Ilara, heavy as the grand, polished lid of the Steinway that dominated the room. This wasn't just a test of her musical ability. It was an interrogation of her very existence within these hallowed halls. She, Ilara Adler, from the dusty, vibrant chaos of the East Side, a world away from the manicured lawns and ancestral portraits of the university's West Campus, was an outsider. Always had been. Always would be, it seemed. The room, with its high ceilings and hushed reverence, felt less like a sanctuary of art and more like a tribunal. 3 other professors sat beside Thornton, their expressions ranging from polite disinterest to thinly veiled contempt. Dr. Evelyn Hayes, with her sharp spectacles perched on the bridge of her nose, offered a tight-lipped smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Marcus Thorne, a portly man whose fingers were perpetually steepled, barely glanced up from the score in front of him, already, Ilara suspected, having made his judgment. They knew her story, or at least the version whispered in the faculty lounge. A scholarship student, a girl from the wrong side of the tracks, who got lucky, whose raw talent was perhaps a fluke, unrefined and untamed. They saw her simple cotton dress, faded but clean, chosen not for fashion but for its quiet dignity. They saw the slight tremor in her hands, a nervous tic she'd fought since childhood. What they didn't see was the spirit that had survived more than just the judgment of academics. They didn't see the calloused tips of her fingers, earned from countless hours on an old, donated upright piano in a drafty community center. A piano whose broken pedal and sticky keys had become an extension of her own will. They didn't see the silent pact she'd made with her grandmother, a woman whose hands, gnarled by years of hardship, had first guided Alara's own to the keys, whispering tales of music as a language that transcended all barriers. La Campanella, she repeated internally, the name a beautiful, terrifying bell tolling in her mind. It was a piece of staggering difficulty, a whirlwind of rapid octaves, treacherous leaps, and intricate trills, demanding not just flawless technique but a soul that could translate its frantic joy and underlying melancholic beauty. It was a performance piece, a showstopper, something one prepared for years, not something thrown at a student as a final, desperate attempt to break them. Alara took a deep, shuddering breath. Her scholarship, her only path to a future beyond the East Side's limited horizons, hung by a thread. Her mother, working 2 jobs, her grandmother, battling the quiet ravages of time, all of their hopes were tied to her. To fail here was to fail them. To accept their dismissal was to validate every whispered doubt, every condescending glance she'd ever received. But the injustice, it simmered within her, a slow, burning ember. They hadn't seen her, not truly. They'd seen an easy target, a quiet girl they could dismiss, another statistic to fit their narrative. Professor Thornton, with his smug certainty, believed he held all the power. He believed he could dictate her worth, could crush her spirit with a single, impossible command. A faint memory surfaced, a warm tide against the cold dread. Her grandmother bent over the old piano, her fingers, though stiff, still finding a melody, had once told her, "Alara, music isn't just notes on a page. It's a fight, a prayer, a song of your own truth. And sometimes, the most beautiful melodies are born from the deepest silence, from the moments when you think you have no voice left." Alara's gaze finally met Professor Thornton's, the tremor in her hands stilled. The knot in her stomach began to unravel, replaced by something fierce and unyielding. The tears she'd fought back receded, leaving behind a clarity as sharp as a newly struck chord. She saw not the intimidating figure of her professor, but a man blinded by his own assumptions. A man who had underestimated the very essence of music itself. She straightened her shoulders, a silent defiance settling over her slender frame. The polished floor of the audition room seemed to hum beneath her feet, a silent vibration awaiting release. This wasn't just about La Campanella anymore. This was about everything. About every child like her, denied a chance, dismissed before they even had a voice. This was about proving that music wasn't just for those born into privilege, but for anyone whose heart beat with its rhythm. A quiet hum filled the room, though no sound had escaped Alara's lips. It was the sound of a decision made, of a spirit ignited. She took one step, then another, towards the gleaming black monolith that was the piano, her movements deliberate, unhurried. Professor Thornton watched, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, perhaps surprise, perhaps a renewed sense of cynical expectation. Alara reached the bench, her fingers brushing the cool, ivory keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes, not in resignation, but in communion. She felt the wood, the felt, the intricate mechanisms waiting to obey her command. When her eyes opened, they held a fire that had been carefully banked for too long. A single, almost imperceptible nod from her, and the waiting silence in the room deepened, taut with anticipation. This was their game, their impossible piece. But they had no idea whose music they were truly about to hear. The first notes of Liszt's La Campanella didn't just fill the grand audition room, they exploded within it. A cascade of sound, that was both delicate and fiercely powerful. Ilara's fingers, no longer trembling, danced across the ivory keys with a precision that belied her unassuming appearance. The opening, a whirlwind of high-pitched, bell-like trills and rapid octaves, wasn't merely played, it was summoned, vibrant and alive, an almost defiant introduction to the symphony held captive within her. Professor Thornton, who had expected a tentative, fumbling start, perhaps even a complete breakdown, visibly flinched. His jaw tightened, the carefully constructed mask of detached authority cracking just enough to reveal a sliver of surprise. Beside him, Dr. Evelyn Hayes straightened, her sharp gaze now fixed solely on Ilara, her polished spectacles catching the faint light from the ornate chandelier above. Dr. Marcus Thorne, for the first time since Ilara had entered the room, looked up from his score, his eyes wide with an unreadable mix of shock and dawning realization. Ilara was barely aware of their reactions. The world outside the piano had ceased to exist. In this moment, there was only the music, a torrent of notes demanding her absolute surrender, yet simultaneously granting her ultimate freedom. Each intricate run, each breathtaking leap across the keyboard, was a conversation with her past. She saw her grandmother's gnarled hands pressing down on the keys of their old upright, a crooked smile playing on her lips. Music is the breath of God, child. Let it take yours. She heard the clatter of the East Side Community Center, the shouts of children playing outside, fading into the background as she lost herself in practice, her sanctuary. This piece, La Campanella, usually a show of dazzling, almost inhuman technique, became something more in Ilara's hands. She imbued it with a melancholic beauty, a poignant yearning that underscored its brilliance. The rapid, insistent runs weren't just fast. They were urgent, a voice desperate to be heard. The soaring melodies weren't just pretty. They were a prayer, a lament, a hope for something beyond the confines of her world. It was the sound of struggle, of resilience, of a spirit refusing to be broken. The professors, seasoned musicians themselves, understood the sheer audacity of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a student playing a difficult piece. This was an artist reimagining it, breathing new life into a classic. Ilara navigated the treacherous left-hand arpeggios, the dizzying right-hand jumps, with an effortlessness that bordered on the surreal. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, her dark hair falling across her face, damp with perspiration. But her focus remained absolute, unwavering. Thornton's initial surprise had morphed into something akin to grudging respect, though he fought to conceal it. He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He had seen countless prodigies, but none had ever challenged his preconceptions quite like Ilara. She was an anomaly, an inconvenient truth in his carefully constructed world of pedigree and privilege. He had intended to break her, to reinforce the university's unspoken rule that some dreams were simply not meant for certain people. But she wasn't just refusing to break. She was soaring. Dr. Hayes, ever the academic, began to make faint, almost imperceptible notes on her pad, her pen scratching against the paper. Her expression was one of intense concentration, a professional curiosity overriding her initial skepticism. Dr. Thorne, however, seemed to have undergone a more profound shift. His eyes, usually clouded with an air of detached superiority, now held a flicker of genuine awe. He was mouthing the notes to himself, following Ilara's every move, his head nodding almost involuntarily at her flawless execution of a particularly devilish passage. For Ilara, the music was a shield and a weapon. Each perfect note was a rebuttal to their dismissive glances, a testament to her worth. Each complex chord was a declaration of her right to be here, to claim her place. She played for her mother, whose tired hands had always found a way to provide. She played for her grandmother, whose unwavering belief had been the steadying compass of her life. And in the deepest part of her heart, she played for every unseen, unheard talent, for every young soul whose dreams were stifled by a world that refused to see past their circumstances. As she moved into the heart of the piece, the tempo accelerating, the demands on her technique reaching an almost unbearable intensity, Ilara felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. This was her language, her fight. The hall, which had once felt like a cage, now felt like a stage. She knew the eyes of these powerful people were on her, but their judgment no longer held sway. She was playing for herself, for the defiant spirit that had carried her through every hardship. Then, as the music swirled into a breathtaking crescendo, a moment of extraordinary complexity demanding both hands to cross and intertwine in a blur of motion, Ilara glanced up, her vision momentarily clearing the sheen of sweat. Her eyes locked, for a split second, with Professor Thornton's. And in that brief, unguarded moment, she saw not the disdain she expected, but something else entirely. Something raw, deeply personal, and undeniably pained. It was a flicker of memory, a ghost in his eyes, stirred by her music, a shadow of a past tragedy he had buried deep. His hand, almost imperceptibly, clenched into a tight fist on the edge of the polished table, his knuckles white. The music swelled, threatening to shatter the silence of his secret, hinting at a connection to her own struggle that Ilara couldn't yet fathom. What was this haunted recognition in his gaze? And what painful truth had her music unwittingly unearthed in the seemingly impenetrable facade of Professor Thornton? The final ringing chord of La Campanella hung in the air, a shimmering echo of Ilara's triumph, before slowly, reluctantly, fading into a profound silence. Her hands, still poised above the keys, felt a strange lightness, as if the immense weight of the music had lifted, leaving behind only the ghost of its power. The room was utterly still, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Ilara lowered her hands, her shoulders slumping just slightly, the adrenaline beginning its slow, draining descent. Her gaze instinctively returned to Professor Thornton. The haunted recognition she'd glimpsed in his eyes had vanished, replaced by the familiar, stony mask of authority. Yet she knew it had been real. A faint sheen of sweat still beaded on his brow, betraying a flicker of the intense emotion he had just suppressed. He was rigid, unmoving, his arms still crossed, his knuckles still white against the dark wood of the table. Dr. Evelyn Hayes was the first to break the stillness. She removed her spectacles, placing them carefully on her notes, then slowly clapped, a soft, deliberate sound that resonated disproportionately in the quiet. "Remarkable, Miss Adler," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle, devoid of its usual academic aloofness. "Truly remarkable." There was genuine admiration in her tone, a stark contrast to her earlier skepticism. Dr. Marcus Thorne, on the other hand, pushed back his chair with a scrape that made Ilara jump, rising to his feet. He walked slowly towards the piano, his expression a mixture of profound thought and something akin to disbelief. He stopped a few feet from her, peering at her hands as if searching for a trick. I've heard this piece performed by masters," he began, his voice raspy, "but rarely with such raw emotional clarity. You didn't just play the notes, Miss Adler. You felt them. every agonizing, exquisite one. He shook his head, a small, involuntary smile finally breaking through his usual sternness. Extraordinary. Their words, though complimentary, felt distant, almost surreal. Ilara simply nodded, her throat tight, a tremor running through her exhausted frame. All she could think of was Professor Thornton, his silence, his hidden pain. What had she stirred within him? Thornton finally moved, pushing away from the table. "Thank you, Miss Adler," he said, his voice clipped, betraying nothing of the earlier moment. "You may wait outside. We will deliberate and inform you of our decision." He gestured towards the door, a dismissal that felt both formal and unnervingly abrupt. Ilara rose, her legs feeling unsteady. She wanted to ask, to challenge, to understand what she had seen in his eyes. But the force of his authority, now reasserted, was too great. She gave a slight, deferential bow to all three professors, her gaze lingering on Thornton for another second, searching, but his face was an unyielding mask. As she turned and walked out, she could feel his eyes on her back, a phantom weight that prickled her skin. The waiting room was small, sparse, and smelled faintly of old paper and dust. Ilara sank onto a hard wooden bench, the silence of the room a jarring contrast to the symphony that had just erupted from her soul. Her mind raced, replaying every note, every glance, every unspoken word. The performance itself was a blur of intense focus, but Thornton's reaction, the flicker of that deep, unsettling pain, burned bright in her memory. It was as if her music, a language she understood so intimately, had inadvertently spoken to a hidden wound in him. Time stretched, slow and agonizing. She could hear faint, muffled voices from within the audition room, a low murmur of discussion she couldn't decipher. Was it praise? Was it critique? Was it an argument? Her entire future hung in that balance. Her hopes, her dreams, the sacrifices of her family, all contingent on the verdict of those three powerful individuals. The weight of it pressed down on her, far heavier than any musical score. Suddenly, a name pierced through the wall, a clear, sharp whisper that made Ilara freeze. The incident with Lena, Dr. Hayes's voice, low but distinct, carried through the old door. "It was decades ago, Alistair. You can't let it cloud your judgment now. Miss Adler is clearly in a different league." Ilara's breath hitched. Lena? An incident? Her head reeled. What could this mean? Professor Thornton had a past, a history, a name that evoked something painful and connected to music. The pieces, though fragmented, began to shift, forming a hazy, disturbing picture. Was that why he had been so harsh with her, so quick to dismiss her potential? Was his disdain a reflection of his own buried sorrow rather than her supposed inadequacy? The door creaked open, startling Ilara. Professor Thornton stood there alone, his silhouette framed against the softer light of the hallway beyond. His face was still unreadable, but his eyes, though devoid of the raw emotion she'd seen earlier, held a certain depth, a weary solemnity she hadn't noticed before. "Miss Adler," he began, his voice devoid of its usual sharp edges, almost gentle. "The panel has reached a decision." He paused, and in that agonizing moment, Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, convinced he was about to deliver the final, crushing blow. "However," he continued, taking a step closer, "before I inform you, I wish to speak with you privately. There are questions I have." His gaze was intense, searching, as if trying to unlock a secret. "Questions about your music, yes. but also about something else entirely. Something you played, or rather, how you played it, that reminded me of someone I once knew, someone who also defied expectations. He gestured, not back to the audition room, but to an empty office further down the hall, a place that felt far too secluded for a routine conversation. The weight of his words, the sudden shift in his demeanor, and the mystery of Lena coiled around Ilara, a new, unsettling melody threatening to overshadow the triumphant echoes of La Campanella. What untold story lay hidden behind Professor Thornton's impassive facade? And how was Ilara's music entangled in its painful threads? Ilara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The invitation for a private conversation, especially from Professor Thornton, felt less like a privilege and more like an interrogation. His words, "Someone I once knew, someone who also defied expectations," resonated with an unnerving intensity. What was this secret history, this Lena that her music had conjured? She nodded. Her voice caught in her throat and followed him down the long, silent corridor. The office was small, crammed with overflowing bookshelves and stacks of scores. A single dusty window overlooked a quiet courtyard where autumn leaves swirled in the breeze. Thornton closed the door behind them, the click echoing with a sense of finality. He motioned to a worn leather armchair opposite his cluttered desk, then took his own seat, his gaze unwavering as Ilara sank into the plush but slightly threadbare upholstery. "Miss Adler," he began, his voice softer now, almost conversational, a stark contrast to his earlier harshness. "Your performance today was exceptional, far beyond what any of us anticipated. Your technique is flawless, your interpretation profound. You breathe life into the music in a way few pianists ever achieve." The words, coming from him, were a balm, yet the tension in the room remained thick, almost palpable. "Thank you, sir," Ilara managed, her voice barely a whisper. She still couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about her music. He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his gaze intense, searching. "But it wasn't just the technical prowess, Miss Adler. It was something in your phrasing, particularly in the cadenza, that brought back a memory. A ghost, if you will." He paused, his eyes glazing over slightly, lost in a distant past. "There was a girl once, a student here many years ago. Her name was Lena. She, like you, came from humble beginnings. She had that same fire, that raw, untamed brilliance. And she played La Campanella with a passion that could shake the very foundations of this institution." Ilara listened, mesmerized. Lena. The name echoed, tying itself to the fragment she'd overheard. "What happened to her, sir?" she asked, the question escaping her lips before she could fully consider its impudence. A shadow crossed Thornton's face, deepening the lines around his eyes. He hesitated, clearly wrestling with a profound internal conflict. "Lena, she was exceptional," he repeated, his voice tinged with a deep regret. "But this university at that time was even more resistant to change, to those who didn't fit the mold. She faced immense pressure, constant scrutiny. They tried to break her, just as I unfairly tried to break you today." He ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture of profound weariness. "She was my protégée. I believed in her, fiercely, but I was also ambitious. I pushed her, perhaps too hard, wanting her to conform, to prove her worth to a world that didn't deserve her. I wanted her to play their game, to beat them at it." His voice dropped, barely audible. She was scheduled for a final, crucial recital, a chance to silence all the critics, to secure her future. But she never made it to the stage. The pressure, it became too much. The night before, she disappeared. Left a note saying she couldn't live up to the expectations, that the music had become a burden, not a joy. He clenched his jaw, his eyes now fixed on some distant point, a vision of the past playing out before him. They found her 3 days later. It was an accident, a fall, near the old bridge by the river. Ilara gasped, a wave of profound sadness washing over her. She took her own life? The words were heavy, tasting of tragedy. Thornton slowly shook his head, his gaze returning to Ilara, filled with a raw vulnerability she never imagined he possessed. The official report called it an accident, but I knew the weight she carried, the weight I and my blind ambition had helped place on her shoulders. I failed her, Miss Adler, failed to see the person beyond the prodigy, failed to protect her from the very institution I served. He leaned back, the confession clearly taking a toll. Her death, it shattered me. It made me question everything. For years, I avoided La Campanella. It was her signature piece. And when you played it today, with that same raw, defiant spirit, it was as if Lena herself was in the room. The silence that followed was heavy with the ghost of Lena, a poignant echo in the grand hall. Ilara felt a chill, a deep, unsettling connection to this girl from the past. Their struggles, separated by decades, were eerily similar. The pressure, the judgment, the fight to be heard. "Professor," Ilara began, her voice soft, "I understand why you were hard on me. You saw her in me, didn't you? And you were afraid." He met her gaze, a flicker of something new, acknowledgement, perhaps even a hint of respect, in his eyes. "Yes, Ilara, I was. Afraid of history repeating itself, afraid of seeing another brilliant, vulnerable talent crushed by the same system. But your spirit, your fire, it's different. You carry your burdens, yes, but you also carry a profound strength, a resilience I haven't seen since Lena first walked into my studio." He sighed, a long, weary sound. "I had decided to vote against your scholarship, to protect you, in my own misguided way, from this place, to save you from a fate I couldn't save her from." Ilara's heart dropped. Even after her performance, he intended to deny her? The injustice of it, born from a past tragedy, was almost unbearable. But my performance changed my mind, he admitted, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips, the first genuine one she'd ever seen. "The others would have voted you in regardless. They saw only the brilliance. But I saw more. I saw the girl who needs to find her own path, not be dictated by mine or by the ghosts of the past. Your performance wasn't just a testament to your genius. It was a defiant shout. And it reminded me that sometimes the greatest protection isn't shielding someone from the fight, but empowering them to win it on their own terms." He paused, his gaze hardening slightly. "However, there is still one hurdle. The scholarship is contingent on your acceptance into the advanced piano program, which requires a faculty mentor. And after this revelation, I cannot be yours. But I have another proposal, one that will not only secure your future here, but also perhaps bring a long overdue reckoning to this institution. Are you willing to fight, Ilara, not just for yourself, but for every Lena who came before you, and every aspiring artist who will come after?" The weight of his question, the unspoken implications of a battle against the very establishment she sought to join, settled around Ilara, a new, thrilling, yet terrifying challenge. What reckoning did Professor Thornton envision, and what dangerous alliance was he proposing that would force her to confront not just her talent, but the deep-seated injustices of the prestigious university itself? Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. The question Professor Thornton posed wasn't simply an offer. It was a gauntlet thrown, a call to arms that resonated with the defiant spirit still humming within her from La Campanella. Fight not just for herself, but for every Lena, for every aspiring artist who would come after. The weight of his words settled on her, heavy and exhilarating. This wasn't just about a scholarship anymore. It was about justice, about changing the very fabric of an institution that had once broken a spirit like hers. "Yes, Professor," Ilara said, her voice steady, stronger than she expected. "I'm willing to fight. Tell me what I need to do." The words were a quiet declaration, an acceptance of a destiny far grander and more perilous than she had ever imagined. A slow, almost imperceptible nod from Thornton. The weary lines around his eyes seemed to soften, replaced by a flicker of renewed purpose. "Good," he said, the single word carrying the weight of years of unspoken regret and burgeoning hope. This university prides itself on its traditions, its standards. But those standards have often been a shield for prejudice, a barrier against true talent from outside their gilded circles. Lena was a victim of that, and you, Ilara, were almost another. He leaned back, his gaze sweeping over the cluttered room as if searching for inspiration. "My plan is unconventional, risky, but it is the only way to expose the hypocrisy and force a change." He picked up a slim, leather-bound folder from his desk, its edges worn with age. Lena's case was officially closed, deemed an accident. But the internal investigation, which I fought tooth and nail to keep active, revealed a pattern of systemic bias, deliberate sabotage from certain faculty members, and an institutional indifference that created an impossible environment for her. The official report was suppressed, of course. Ilara felt a cold dread creep up her spine. Sabotage? Who would do something like that? Thornton's eyes narrowed, a steely glint replacing their earlier weariness. Professor Silas Blackwood. He was head of the piano department then, a man who believed musical genius was inherited, not earned. He saw Lena's background as a stain on the department's reputation. He saw her talent as an affront to his worldview. He paused, his voice dropping. "And he is still here, Ilara. He is still a powerful, influential member of the faculty council. He's the reason I cannot be your mentor, as his continued presence on the board would make it a conflict of interest, and worse, put a target on your back." The revelation sent a shockwave through Ilara. Blackwood. The name was vaguely familiar from hushed whispers in the student common rooms. A formidable, almost mythical figure known for his conservative views and iron grip on classical interpretation. To face him, to challenge him, felt like an impossible task. "What do you propose?" Ilara asked, her voice tight. The gravity of the situation was beginning to settle in, a heavy cloak around her shoulders. "The advanced program requires a capstone project in the final year," Thornton explained, his gaze intense. "A public performance, a thesis on musical interpretation, or an original composition. It's meant to be a showcase of talent, but we will make it something more. Your project will be a performance. A highly visible, meticulously planned public recital, not just within the university but advertised to the broader community, to the media." He saw the apprehension in her eyes and continued, This isn't just about music, Ilara. This is about narrative. We will leverage your story, the quiet genius from the East Side, overcoming adversity, and intertwine it with a subtle but undeniable tribute to Lena. We will show them that true talent transcends social class, that the university's standards have stifled voices, not celebrated them. And when you perform, the very purity of your music, born from a place of authenticity they cannot comprehend, will be your weapon. But how will that expose Professor Blackwood or the suppressed report? Ilara questioned, her mind racing, trying to grasp the intricate web he was weaving. Thornton leaned forward, his voice a low, urgent whisper. Lena's note, the one she left before her disappearance. It was found, but its contents were deemed too sensitive and destroyed. However, a transcript exists. I kept it. It details the specific instances of sabotage, the psychological torment she endured, much of it orchestrated by Blackwood. My plan is to ensure that, at a critical moment during your capstone performance, this transcript, Lena's voice from the grave, is revealed. It will be undeniably linked to your performance, a powerful emotional accusation they cannot ignore. The audacity of the plan took Ilara's breath away. It was brilliant, dangerous, and incredibly high stakes. It meant not just proving her musical genius, but becoming a symbol, a beacon of change. It meant confronting the very power structures that had nearly crushed her before she even began. It will be a public spectacle, Thornton continued, his eyes burning with a fierce, quiet resolve. The media will be present, university alumni, donors. It will force their hand. They won't be able to sweep it under the rug again without facing immense public backlash. But it means you will be under extreme scrutiny, Ilara. Not just for your music, but for your defiance. Blackwood will recognize the parallels, and he will fight back. He will try to discredit you, to break you. Are you truly ready for that? Ilara took a deep breath, the implications of his words washing over her. She thought of her mother, her grandmother, their sacrifices. She thought of Lena, a ghost whose story demanded justice. The fear was real, a cold tremor in her gut. But stronger than the fear was a surge of righteous indignation, a sense of purpose that ignited a fire she hadn't known she possessed. She looked at Professor Thornton, her gaze firm. Professor, I've been fighting my whole life, for my family, for my dreams, and now I'll fight for Lena too. Tell me what I need to do. A slow smile, genuinely warm, spread across Thornton's face, transforming his severe features. Excellent. Your first task, then, is to secure a new mentor, someone who believes in true artistic freedom, someone who will guide your genius without trying to tame it. I have someone in mind, Dr. Aris Thorne. He's Marcus Thorne's brother, an outsider like us, an expert in contemporary classical music, and a fierce advocate for artistic integrity. He holds a position on the university's Arts Council, a powerful voice often ignored. But now, he will be crucial. But first, you must convince him that you are worthy of his unconventional tutelage, and his schedule is notoriously difficult to break into. Good luck, Ilara. For this fight, you will need every ally you can find. The weight of her mission, now firmly placed on her shoulders, felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Her journey from the audition room was far from over. It was just beginning, and the path ahead was riddled with unforeseen obstacles and powerful enemies she had yet to encounter. The quest for Dr. Aris Thorne felt like chasing a wisp of smoke. After her intense conversation with Professor Thornton, Ilara had expected immediate action, a clear path laid before her. Instead, she found herself navigating a bureaucratic labyrinth designed to deter. Eris Thorne, a name whispered with a mix of reverence and bewilderment within the hallowed halls, was not just an academic. He was an enigma. Thornton had warned her. Eris Thorne was a rebel, a virtuoso who had abandoned traditional concert stages for experimental soundscapes and teaching a select few. He operated outside the usual departmental structures, a maverick whose office was rumored to be in the furthest, least used wing of the music building, if he had one at all. Days turned into a frustrating blur of unanswered emails, curt responses from his assistants, and fruitless searches across campus. Ilara felt the weight of the mission, and the ghost of Lena pressing down on her. How could she possibly ignite a reckoning if she couldn't even get past a voicemail? One crisp autumn morning, a glimmer of hope. Ilara overheard a group of graduate students discussing a spontaneous, unadvertised concert happening that evening. A rare appearance by Dr. Thorne, performing one of his avant-garde compositions in the small, rarely used Recital Hall 3. It was her chance. That evening, the Recital Hall 3 was sparsely filled, mostly by a scattering of curious students and a few dedicated contemporary music enthusiasts. The room was unlike the grand audition hall. Smaller, darker, with exposed brick and a single spotlight illuminating a strange array of instruments. A traditional grand piano, yes, but also a collection of electronic synthesizers, a loop pedal, and what looked like a homemade percussion setup, crafted from metal pipes and glass bottles. When Dr. Eris Thorne finally appeared, he was nothing like his brother Marcus or Professor Thornton. He was younger, perhaps in his late 40s, with a shock of unruly dark hair streaked with silver, a neatly trimmed beard, and eyes that held a restless, intellectual fire. He wore a simple black turtleneck and jeans, a stark contrast to the professor's tweed jackets and tailored suits. He moved with a quiet intensity, a focused energy that was immediately captivating. He didn't speak to the audience. He simply nodded, then immersed himself in his instruments. The performance began, not with a melody, but with a primal, rhythmic beat created by striking the metal pipes, layered with ghostly electronic echoes. Then, his hands went to the piano, not playing a traditional chord, but plucking the strings directly, creating a haunting, ethereal soundscape. It was jarring, unconventional, yet undeniably mesmerizing. He built layers of sound, weaving improvisation with meticulously crafted motifs, creating a narrative that was abstract, yet deeply emotional. Ilara watched, utterly spellbound. This wasn't the classical world she knew, but it was music in its purest, most uninhibited form. Eris Thorne was fearless, pushing boundaries, unafraid to challenge convention. He was everything she realized she needed in a mentor, someone who understood that music was not just about precision, but about truth, about expression, even if that truth was uncomfortable. When the last reverberation faded, a profound silence descended, far heavier than any applause. Eris Thorne sat still for a long moment, then slowly rose, gave a small, almost shy bow, and quietly exited the stage. The audience, still processing, offered only a smattering of tentative applause. Ilara knew this was her only shot. She pushed through the small crowd, her heart pounding with a fresh urgency. She found him backstage, packing away his strange instruments, his movements methodical. "Dr. Thorne?" she ventured, her voice a little breathless. He looked up, his eyes, a startling shade of green, fixing on her. There was no recognition, only polite curiosity. "Yes?" "My name is Ilara Adler," she began, the words tumbling out. Professor Thornton suggested I speak with you. He said you might consider being my faculty mentor for the advanced piano program. Eris Thorne paused, his hand hovering over a synthesizer knob. His expression remained neutral, but a hint of something flickered in his eyes. Ah, the prodigy. I heard whispers of your audition. La Campanella played with surprising ferocity, I'm told. My brother was quite animated about it, which is rare. He resumed packing, dismissing her almost casually. I appreciate the thought, Miss Adler, but my work is highly specialized. I deal in sonic exploration, not reinterpreting the Romantic era. I'm afraid I wouldn't be the right fit for a classical pianist, no matter how gifted. A wave of despair washed over Ilara. This was it. She was being dismissed, politely but firmly. But then, Lena's ghost whispered, "Don't let them silence you." Professor Thornton's charge echoed, "Fight, Ilara." "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice stronger, "Professor Thornton believes that my work will become less about reinterpretation and more about revolution. About exposing the deeper truths that this university has buried. About Lena." At the mention of Lena's name, Eris Thorne froze. His hands, which had been deftly coiling cables, stopped. The polite indifference vanished, replaced by a sudden piercing intensity. He turned fully to face her. His eyes narrowed, searching her face for any hint of manipulation. "Lena?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper, laced with an unmistakable undercurrent of pain and recognition. "What do you know of Lena?" Ilara met his gaze squarely. "Professor Thornton told me her story. About the sabotage, about Professor Blackwood, about the suppressed report. He believes I can complete Lena's fight, expose the truth, and challenge the systemic prejudice here. And he thinks you, with your unconventional approach and your position on the Arts Council, are the only one who can truly guide me through this." Eris Thorne stared at her for a long, agonizing moment, his expression unreadable, a complex tapestry of old wounds and dawning understanding. The air between them crackled with unspoken history, with the weight of a shared purpose that had just been unexpectedly unveiled. He saw her, not just as a student, but as a potential ally, a conduit to a justice long denied. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Professor Thornton is a complex man. He carries burdens few understand. If he spoke of Lena and of my brother's involvement, there is more to this than just a scholarship. What exactly is this revolution you speak of, Miss Adler? And how does it involve a ghost from my own past?" The sudden, searing intensity of his questions and the palpable pain in his voice revealed a connection to Lena far deeper than Ilara had anticipated, plunging her deeper into the university's hidden history and the dangerous alliance she was forging. The silence after Dr. Eris Thorne's questions stretched, thick with expectation and the weight of decades-old pain. His eyes, fixed on Ilara, seemed to pierce through her, searching for the truth. Ilara knew this was the pivotal moment, the turning point in her quest. She had to lay bare the audacious plan, risk his rejection, or gain an indispensable ally. "Professor Thornton believes that Lena's death wasn't just an accident born of pressure, Dr. Thorne," Ilara began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "He believes it was the tragic culmination of systemic prejudice and deliberate sabotage, largely orchestrated by Professor Silas Blackwood." She watched his face, noting the subtle tightening of his jaw at Blackwood's name. "Thornton has a transcript of Lena's final note, a suppressed document that details the torment she endured, the specific instances of bias. He wants to use my capstone project, a public recital, to expose the truth, to bring that transcript to light, and to finally bring justice for Lena and for every other student who has been silenced by this institution. Aris Thorne's gaze remained unblinking, unreadable. He walked slowly back to his instruments, picking up a small, ornate music box, turning it over in his hands. "Silas Blackwood," he murmured, his voice laced with a bitter irony. "The pillar of classical integrity, as he calls himself. He was always difficult, prejudiced. My brother Marcus spent years trying to get under his skin, to challenge his archaic views. But sabotage? Deliberate torment?" He looked up, his green eyes flashing with a renewed, fierce intensity. "And a suppressed note? A transcript?" Ilara nodded. "Thornton has it. He believes the public exposure of Lena's truth during a highly visible performance linked to my story will force the university's hand. He wants to create a narrative that they cannot ignore, one that will finally force them to confront their past and present injustices." Aris Thorne replaced the music box, his movements deliberate. A heavy sigh escaped him, a sound filled with old ghosts. "My brother Marcus knew Lena," he said softly, almost to himself. "They were classmates, close friends. Her death, it broke him. He rarely speaks of it, but he always suspected it wasn't just pressure. He sensed a deeper, more insidious darkness at play. He tried to investigate, but his efforts were dismissed, swept under the rug by the university's powerful inner circle. It's why he buried himself in his own research, withdrew from the public eye. My own career, my unconventional path, was partly a rebellion against their rigidity, their suffocating adherence to tradition at the expense of artistic freedom and human decency." He turned back to Ilara, a new light in his eyes, a glimmer of the rebellion she had felt in his music. "Professor Thornton carries the guilt of a mentor who failed his protege. My brother carries the grief of a friend betrayed. And I carry the anger of an artist who saw creativity stifled and potential destroyed by small-minded men. This isn't just Lena's story, Ilara. This is the story of this entire institution, its shadowed corners and whispered truths. A story that needs to be told, loudly and unequivocally." A slow smile spread across Aris Thorne's face, a genuine warmth replacing his initial reserve. "You, Miss Adler, are not merely a gifted pianist. You are a catalyst, a force of nature ready to break down walls that have stood for decades." "And yes," he declared, his voice gaining conviction, "I will be your mentor. We will make this capstone project not just a performance, but a declaration, a testament to truth and art. We will prepare a program that is both a classical masterpiece and a modern rebellion. We will honor Lena, and we will rattle this place to its core." Ilara felt a rush of relief and exhilaration. She had found her ally, her unconventional maestro. The path ahead was still perilous, but now she had someone to guide her through its treacherous turns. Over the next few weeks, the partnership between Ilara and Aris Thorne blossomed. Their lessons were unlike any she'd experienced. He pushed her beyond technique, urging her to find her unique voice within the music, to imbue every note with her own story, her own truth. He introduced her to contemporary composers, to experimental techniques, broadening her musical horizons in ways she'd never imagined. He taught her to improvise, to compose, to see the piano not just as an instrument, but as an extension of her soul. He also introduced her to her new home on campus, a quaint, small dorm room she shared with another scholarship student, a quiet girl named Chloe who was studying art history. Ilara now felt a real part of the university, not just an outsider looking in. But as Alara immersed herself in her new studies and the demanding preparation for the capstone project, Professor Thornton was busy behind the scenes. He meticulously gathered the university's internal documents, double-checking the authenticity of Lena's transcript, discreetly cultivating contacts within the media, and rallying support from sympathetic faculty members. He was building the foundation for their inevitable confrontation with Professor Blackwood. Meanwhile, Professor Silas Blackwood, a man who moved through the university's elite circles like a phantom limb of its archaic past, began to take notice of Alara. News of her extraordinary audition had spread like wildfire, reaching even his insulated tower. He observed her from a distance, a cold, calculating glint in his eyes. He saw the whispers of her unconventional mentorship with Iris Thorne, the East Side girl pushing against tradition. He recognized the threat she posed, a jarring echo of Lena's spirit, rising from the past to challenge his dominion. One afternoon, as Alara emerged from a particularly intense session with Iris Thorne, she found a cryptic note tucked into the strap of her backpack. It was a single, stark sentence, written in elegant, old-fashioned script. "Some truths are better left buried, Miss Adler, for your own good." There was no name, no signature, just the unsettling weight of a threat. The game was beginning. The unseen war between tradition and revolution had officially drawn its first blood. Blackwood was aware of her, and he was making his move. The stakes were suddenly higher, the dangers more immediate. Who had left the note, and what chilling message did it truly convey from the shadows? The chilling note, stark and anonymous, felt like a cold hand closing around Alara's heart. "Some truths are better left buried, Miss Adler, for your own good." The words, elegant yet menacing, confirmed her darkest suspicions. Professor Blackwood was aware of her, and he was drawing battle lines. Her transformation from an unnoticed scholarship student to a defiant symbol of change was not going unnoticed, nor was it welcome. Alara's first instinct was to show the note to Iris Thorne, but a deeper, more primal urge told her to keep it to herself for now. She needed to understand the game before revealing her hand. She tucked the note deep into her pocket, its presence a constant, unsettling weight. The pressure intensified in the weeks that followed. Her lessons with Iris Thorne became a rigorous blend of artistic exploration and strategic planning. They meticulously crafted her capstone program, weaving classical masterpieces with modern compositions, always with an underlying narrative that subtly echoed Lena's journey. Iris insisted on including a segment of free improvisation, a bold move for a classical recital, designed to showcase Alara's raw, untamed talent and to overtly challenge the rigid confines of tradition that Blackwood embodied. Meanwhile, Professor Thornton, operating from the shadows, leaked carefully chosen pieces of information to friendly journalists. Not about Lena directly, but about Alara's extraordinary background, her self-taught genius, and her unique artistic vision. The narrative of the East Side prodigy taking on the ivory tower began to build, creating a buzz that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The whispers in the university halls grew louder. Some faculty members, particularly those sympathetic to Iris Thorne's more progressive views, expressed cautious optimism about Alara. Others, loyal to Blackwood, cast suspicious glances, their disdain barely concealed. Alara often caught Professor Blackwood's piercing gaze across the quad or in the dining hall. His eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable, yet undeniably hostile. He seemed to be weighing her, measuring her, assessing the threat. One afternoon, Alara was engrossed in practice in a shared studio, her fingers flying across the keys of a grand piano when the door creaked open. It was Chloe, her dorm mate, a girl with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression. Chloe, usually quiet and reserved, looked unusually distressed. "Ilara, I need to tell you something," Chloe stammered, wringing her hands. "I know we haven't known each other long, but you're a good person. And what they're doing isn't right." Ilara stopped playing, her heart leaping into her throat. "What are you talking about, Chloe?" Chloe glanced nervously around the empty hallway before lowering her voice to a frantic whisper. "Professor Blackwood. He approached me. He knows about your capstone project. He knows about Eris Thorne." She paused, taking a shaky breath. He offered me a scholarship, a full ride for next year to transfer to the Advanced Art History program. He said he saw potential in my work. But there was a condition." Her eyes, wide and frightened, met Ilara's. "He wants me to gather information on you, on your unconventional mentor, on your radical program. He wants to know everything." A cold wave washed over Ilara. Blackwood wasn't just observing. He was actively moving against her, using her own dorm mate as a pawn. "Chloe, did you agree?" Tears welled in Chloe's eyes. "I didn't know what to do. My family, we don't have much. This scholarship, it would change everything. But I can't. I can't betray you, Ilara. Not after what I've seen, what I've heard about your talent, your spirit." She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket, the same elegant script as the anonymous note Ilara carried. "He gave me this, a template of what he's looking for. But it's not just about your music. It's about your background, your family, your associations." Ilara took the paper. It was a list of subtle, probing questions. Does Miss Adler discuss Professor Thornton frequently? Does she express any radical views on university tradition? Has she mentioned any troubling historical incidents involving the music department? The thinly veiled attempt to dig into Lena's story was sickeningly clear. Blackwood wasn't just trying to discredit her. He was trying to understand the extent of their knowledge, to anticipate their move. "Chloe," Ilara said, her voice filled with a sudden, fierce protectiveness. "Thank you for telling me. You did the right thing. But you can't be a part of this. It's too dangerous. Tell him you can't do it. Tell him you're too busy with your own studies. I'll find a way to make sure your scholarship isn't jeopardized. I promise." Chloe shook her head, fear still etched on her face. "He's not a man who takes no for an answer easily, Ilara. And he's powerful." As if on cue, the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. Both girls froze. The door to the studio swung open, revealing Professor Silas Blackwood, his tall, imposing figure filling the doorway. His sharp eyes immediately fell on Ilara, then flickered to Chloe, a knowing, menacing glint in their depths. "Miss Adler," Blackwood said, his voice a low, silken purr that sent shivers down Ilara's spine. "And Miss Jensen. A productive afternoon, I trust?" "Chloe, I believe we had an understanding about certain priorities. And Miss Adler, a word of advice. The path to greatness is often paved with solitude. Unnecessary alliances can prove detrimental." His gaze, cold and unwavering, bore into Ilara's, a direct challenge. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air, a poisonous whisper that warned of the escalating war. He knew. He knew about Chloe. He knew about their intentions, and he was making it clear that he would stop at nothing to protect his secrets and his power. The confrontation was no longer theoretical. It was here now, in the very space where her music was meant to thrive. What would Blackwood's next move be? And how would Alara navigate this direct assault on her burgeoning network of allies? Professor Blackwood's gaze was a viper's strike, venomous and precise, pinning Alara and Chloe in place. The air in the practice room crackled with unspoken animosity, a palpable tension that felt heavier than any musical score. Chloe, pale and trembling, instinctively recoiled, her hand clutching Alara's arm. Alara, however, met Blackwood's stare, a defiant spark in her eyes. The anonymous note, Chloe's confession, and now this direct confrontation, it all coalesced into a singular, undeniable truth. The fight had begun in earnest. "Professor Blackwood?" Alara said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Miss Jensen and I were merely discussing the merits of classical interpretation versus modern theory. A rich academic debate, I assure you." It was a lie, bold and instantaneous, but it bought them a moment. Blackwood's lips curled into a sneer, a chilling parody of a smile. "Indeed, I'm certain Dr. Thorne's modern theories are quite infectious. But remember, Miss Adler, true artistry understands its boundaries. It doesn't seek to demolish the foundations laid by centuries of genius." His eyes lingered on Chloe, a pointed reminder of his leverage. "Miss Jensen, I trust your priorities remain clear. Opportunities such as yours are not to be squandered." With a final, dismissive glance, a silent warning hanging heavy in the air, he turned and swept out of the room, leaving behind a lingering chill. As the door clicked shut, Chloe collapsed onto the piano bench, her face buried in her hands. "He knows, Alara. He knows everything. I'm so sorry. I couldn't—" Alara placed a comforting hand on Chloe's shoulder. "Hey, it's okay. You did the right thing by telling me. That took courage." But inside, Alara's mind raced. Blackwood's directness meant he was escalating. The threat to Chloe, subtle yet undeniable, was a harsh reminder of the stakes. This wasn't just about winning a scholarship or exposing a past injustice. It was about protecting those around her. She found Aris Thorne later that day, after an urgent message summoned him. He listened intently, his expression grim as Alara recounted the encounter, showing him Blackwood's veiled note and Chloe's template. "He's bolder than I anticipated," Aris murmured, examining the note. "He's not just trying to dissuade you. He's trying to isolate you, to cut off your allies before you can even begin your campaign." His gaze hardened. But this also confirms what we suspected. He understands the power of Lena's story. He's afraid. "What about Chloe?" Alara asked, her voice laced with concern. "He implied her scholarship was dependent on her spying on me." Aris rubbed his beard, a thoughtful frown on his face. "Chloe's scholarship for next year would be contingent on Blackwood's recommendation as head of the Arts Council. He holds sway over that. We need to neutralize his leverage. Professor Thornton is already working on alternative funding sources for students who face undue influence from faculty. It's part of his broader strategy to expose Blackwood's corrupt practices within the university's financial aid system. But it will take time." He looked at Alara, his eyes filled with a new resolve. "For now, we need to accelerate our timetable. Blackwood's public confrontation means he feels cornered. He'll make more moves. We need to strike first, and we need to hit hard." Their capstone project, originally scheduled for the end of the semester, was now pushed forward. The university's Arts Week, a minor, usually low-key event, was suddenly chosen as the venue. Thornton leveraged his quiet influence, suggesting Alara's unique talent would be a prime draw, subtly planting seeds with the event organizers. The date was set, a mere 3 weeks away. The pressure was immense. Ilara and Aris threw themselves into preparation. Days blurred into nights spent in the practice rooms. Aris pushed Ilara beyond her technical limits, not for the sake of virtuosity, but for emotional depth, for the ability to convey Lena's pain, resilience, and unfulfilled promise through her music. He encouraged her to improvise, to compose, to weave her own voice into the classical fabric, ensuring her program was a true embodiment of defiance and artistic freedom. Thornton, meanwhile, worked feverishly on the logistics of the reveal. He planned for Lena's transcript to be distributed to key members of the media and the Arts Council during the intermission of Ilara's performance, complete with a carefully prepared statement that tied her story directly to Ilara's. He meticulously crafted the message, ensuring it was damning yet undeniable, factual yet emotionally resonant. But Blackwood, too, was not idle. Ilara began to notice subtle, unsettling events. Her practice room keys mysteriously disappeared, forcing her to miss precious hours. Her sheet music for crucial pieces was found slightly altered, subtle but damaging changes that could throw off her performance. Small, calculated acts of sabotage designed to fray her nerves, to undermine her confidence. One evening, Ilara discovered a string broken on the grand piano in her assigned practice room. Not a clean break, but a jagged tear that suggested deliberate damage. Frustration, cold and sharp, pierced through her exhaustion. This wasn't just an institutional battle. It was becoming deeply personal. She confided in Aris, her voice trembling with barely suppressed anger. "He's trying to break me, just like he broke Lena. He wants me to give up." Aris, his face grim, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "He wants you to believe you're alone, Ilara. That's his tactic, but you're not. And this," he said, gesturing to the damaged piano, "is proof that we are getting to him. He wouldn't risk such overt actions if he wasn't desperate." He then revealed his own counter-gambit. "I've arranged for an old friend, a renowned piano technician, to be discreetly on standby during your performance, just in case. And Professor Thornton has secured the presence of a prominent investigative journalist, a woman known for her fearless pursuit of truth, to attend. She won't just report on the concert. She'll be looking for a deeper story. This isn't just about the reveal anymore, Ilara. It's about building a fortress of witnesses around you, making it impossible for Blackwood to deny the truth or to harm you further without severe public repercussions." The night of the capstone performance arrived, thick with anticipation and an almost unbearable tension. The grand auditorium, usually reserved for touring orchestras, was packed, a buzzing hive of students, faculty, alumni, and curious media. Professor Blackwood sat in the front row, his expression a chilling blend of calculated disdain and watchful malice. Beside him sat Dean Thompson, the university's top administrator, a man known for his cautious, conservative approach to institutional matters, his face a mask of polite expectation. As Ilara walked onto the stage, the spotlight blinding her, she felt the weight of every expectation, every sacrifice, every ghost in the room. But she also felt a fierce, burning resolve. This wasn't just her moment. It was Lena's. It was for Chloe. It was for every silenced voice. Her hands, calloused and strong, reached for the keys, the polished black surface cool beneath her touch. She took a deep breath, and then a jarring sound shattered the silence. A high-pitched metallic squeal, followed by a sickening thud, echoed from the piano. A crucial key, the very one needed for her opening piece, was now visibly stuck, unplayable. Blackwood's trap had been sprung. a final public act of sabotage designed to humiliate her and derail her performance before she could even play a single note. The auditorium held its breath, waiting for her reaction, waiting for her to break. The high-pitched squeal, the sickening thud, and the sight of the stuck piano key ripped through the hushed anticipation of the grand auditorium like a jagged tear. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Professor Blackwood, seated in the front row, allowed himself a faint, triumphant smirk, a flicker of cruel satisfaction in his eyes. Dean Thompson, beside him, shifted uncomfortably, sensing the impending disaster. Ilara's heart seized in her chest. For a fleeting second, raw panic threatened to engulf her. He's won. It's over. But then, the image of Lena's solemn face, the echo of her grandmother's quiet strength, solidified her resolve. This wasn't just about a broken key. It was a desperate, final attempt to silence her, just as Lena had been silenced. And Ilara would not yield. She met Blackwood's gaze, not with fear, but with a fierce, unwavering defiance. He expected her to falter, to break, but he had fundamentally underestimated her. She turned to the audience, a calm spreading through her that surprised even herself. "It seems we have a small technical difficulty," she announced, her voice clear and resonant, carrying easily through the vast hall. "A stubborn key, perhaps, unwilling to cooperate with my chosen program." As murmurs of sympathy and confusion spread, Ilara subtly caught Horace Thorne's eye in the wings. He nodded, a sharp, decisive signal to the discreet piano technician, who immediately began a hushed, swift movement towards the stage, tools in hand. "However," Ilara continued, turning back to the grand piano, her hands hovering above the keys, "true music is not bound by a single instrument, nor by the rigid adherence to a pre-written score. Sometimes, the most honest expression comes from the unexpected, from embracing the imperfections." With that, Ilara did something audacious, something no classical capstone recital had ever seen. She began to play, not her planned opening, but a breathtaking improvisation. Her left hand found a low, rumbling bass line, a mournful, haunting melody that spoke of struggle and loss. Her right hand, carefully avoiding the damaged key, danced across the untouched octaves, weaving intricate, searching melodies that climbed and soared, full of yearning and fierce hope. She incorporated percussive elements, tapping rhythms on the wooden frame of the piano, creating a soundscape that was both raw and profoundly beautiful. The audience, initially confused, quickly fell silent, captivated by her sheer ingenuity. They leaned forward, mesmerized. This wasn't just a performance, it was a testament to resilience, a phoenix rising from the ashes of sabotage. Horace Thorne, watching from the wings, offered a small, proud smile. She was not just playing for time. She was making a powerful statement about artistic freedom, about the very essence of creativity. The technician worked quickly, his hands a blur, his movements precise and practiced. The soft clinking of his tools was barely audible beneath the swells of Ilara's improvised symphony. Blackwood's triumphant smirk had vanished, replaced by a growing fury, his eyes darting between Ilara's defiant performance and the technician working furiously to undo his malice. Dean Thompson watched, his face a canvas of escalating surprise and concern. Just as Ilara brought her improvisation to a soaring, poignant close, the technician gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The key, stubborn no more, lay perfectly aligned, ready. Ilara transitioned seamlessly. Without a moment's hesitation, she launched into the opening of her capstone program. A contemporary piece by a celebrated female composer, a powerful, soaring melody that spoke of overcoming adversity, of finding strength in vulnerability. Her previous improvisation had set the stage, had forged an emotional connection with the audience that transcended the technical. Now, with the piano fully restored, her performance was imbued with a new, fiery intensity. She played with an almost primal force, each note a declaration, a refusal to be silenced. The first half of the recital concluded with a thunderous ovation, the audience on their feet, swept away by the raw emotion and undeniable brilliance of her playing. During the intermission, as the auditorium buzzed with excited chatter, Professor Thornton moved with quiet urgency. The packets, containing Lena's transcript and Thornton's carefully crafted statement, were discreetly distributed to the pre-selected journalists and Arts Council members, including the renowned investigative journalist Sarah Jensen and Dean Thompson himself. Ilara watched from backstage, her heart pounding. She saw the sudden flurry of whispers, the shocked expressions, the journalists quickly flipping through the documents. Dean Thompson's face, initially pale, now flushed with alarm as he read Lena's words, his gaze darting nervously towards Blackwood, who was now being cornered by Sarah Jensen, a fiery look in her eyes. The truth, long buried, was finally seeing the light of day. The bell rang, signaling the end of intermission. As Ilara prepared to re-enter the stage, a sudden panicked shout erupted from the audience. Professor Blackwood, his face a mask of incandescent rage, was on his feet, pointing a trembling finger at Ilara as she emerged. "This is an outrage! A grotesque fabrication! This girl is a charlatan, a pawn in a malicious scheme orchestrated by Thornton and Thorne. This transcript is a lie, a vengeful attack on the integrity of this institution." His voice, usually controlled, cracked with desperation, echoing through the stunned hall. Silence fell, thick and suffocating, as all eyes turned from Blackwood to Ilara. This was it, the moment of reckoning. But before Dean Thompson could respond, before Ilara could even process the assault, Eris Thorne stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Professor Blackwood," he stated, "your outburst only serves to confirm the very truth you desperately try to bury. The integrity of this institution, as you so eloquently put it, demands transparency. Miss Adler's performance is not a fabrication. It is a profound testament to an unyielding spirit. And Lena's truth," he added, his voice resonating with a quiet power, "is a stain that can only be removed by open, honest acknowledgement." Then Professor Thornton, his face resolute, stepped forward, a microphone appearing in his hand as if from nowhere. He had anticipated this. "Dean Thompson," he addressed the flustered dean, "these documents are authenticated internal records. They reveal a pattern of behavior from Professor Blackwood that not only led to the tragic death of a brilliant student, but has perpetuated systemic prejudice within the music department for decades. The university has a choice: to continue to bury its head in the sand, or to finally face its demons and uphold the very values of integrity and fairness it claims to embody." Sarah Jensen, the journalist, seized the moment, her camera crew already capturing Blackwood's panicked, desperate expression. She spoke into a recorder, her voice clear and authoritative. "Professor Blackwood, do you deny the contents of this transcript detailing your alleged psychological torment and sabotage of Lena Petrova, a scholarship student who tragically died?" Blackwood, trapped, his lies exposed under the blinding lights of truth, could only stammer, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Dean Thompson, faced with undeniable evidence and the glare of the media, had no choice. He stood, his face a grim mask. Professor Blackwood, I am placing you on immediate administrative leave pending a full independent investigation. Miss Adler, please continue your performance. A wave of relief, hot and exhilarating, washed over Alara. Justice. For Lena. For Chloe. For herself. She walked back to the piano, her hands trembling now, not with fear, but with a profound, overwhelming emotion. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. The music that poured from her, born of struggle and triumph, of heartbreak and hope, was a symphony of redemption. It wasn't just La Campanella anymore. It was Alara's own composition, a melody of defiant grace, forever echoing in the grand hall, a testament to the power of a single, unbroken note. The auditorium erupted in a standing ovation, not just for the music, but for the profound truth it had carried, a truth that would forever change the tune of the university. The fight had ended, but Alara knew, as her fingers found a final, resonant chord, that her journey as a voice for the voiceless had only just begun. The melody of justice, once a whisper, was now a powerful, undeniable chorus, and she, Alara Adler, was its conductor, forever bound to the silent promise of a better, fairer tomorrow. Alara's journey, from the quiet intensity of an impossible audition to the resounding triumph of a public reckoning, reminds us that the most powerful melodies are often born from the deepest struggles. Her story is a testament to the unyielding spirit of resilience, proving that true genius can never be confined by prejudice or privilege. It teaches us the profound importance of fighting not just for our own dreams, but for the voiceless, for those whose truths have been buried by the systems of power. Professor Thornton found his redemption in Alara's courage, showing us that even those burdened by past failures can find a path to justice. And in the transformative power of music, we witnessed how art can be a weapon, a shield, and a beacon of hope, capable of shattering walls and paving the way for a more equitable world. May Alara's unwavering spirit inspire us all to stand firm against injustice, to find our own defiant grace, and to remember that every unspoken truth yearns for a voice, waiting for its moment to become an unbroken, resonant chord. If Alara's story resonated with you, if it stirred something within your own heart, please like this video. Your support helps us share more powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another journey of inspiration and triumph. Thank you for listening.